So they have been in long discussions over last week and this week with Lecce officials and Dorgu's representatives. We think personal terms aren't expected to be a problem, so now it's just going to come down to club.
Hello and welcome to Stretford Paddock. My name is Joe and we are joined once again by Dharmesh Sheth from Sky Sports News to talk all about Manchester United's transfers. There's loads to talk about. We've got Dorgu, we've got Rashford latest, we've got all sorts. But first of all, Dharmesh, how are you doing, mate?
I'm good. Into the final week now, the home stretch.
Yes.
Could be quite a busy one. There's lots of names actually, not just United, just generally. So I'm expecting it to be, well, let's put it this way, it's going to be busier than last January.
Well, that's a positive, isn't it? I mean, it doesn't take much to be busier than last January, where basically zero happened the entire month.
It's a low bar.
Yeah. It is a very low bar. We'll get into Dorgu in a minute. You put out a bit of an update last night, and I want to talk about that. But before that, let's start with Alejandro Garnacho, because this has been a real divisive one amongst United fans. He's kind of this twin kind of threat of he's probably the most valuable asset we have. And also, he's the sort of player no United fan wants to see us sell. He's an academy player, very exciting, promising youngster. And yet it looks like United are up for selling him. What's the latest with Garnacho?
I think the first thing we should say, you mentioned the fans don't want him to go. I don't think Manchester United want to sell Alejandro Garnacho. They just know that a deal for someone like him represents pure profit with how close they supposedly are now to the PSR rules. So it's a really, really difficult one for Manchester United. And, you know, the valuation seems to be around £55 million. And I think fans, again, will be questioning whether that is far too low a figure for someone whose ceiling appears to be really, really high as well. But there is interest for him. And as much as United don't want to sell, if a huge offer was to come in that met their valuation, then I think they would have to look at it. On the flip side, Ruben Amorim has picked him and started Garnacho in 4 of the last 5 games in all competitions. And he's talked him up as well. He's basically saying, look, he's learning the role. But when you look at how Amorim wants to play, this is the big question everyone keeps asking about Garnacho. Wing back, he's not really a wing back. Those 2-10 positions, he's not really one of them. So it would be something he'd have to work on to find himself a place in the team. Whereas because of United's finances and how Ruben Amorim wants to build this team, it could be that Garnacho is the one that gets sold to be able to trigger this rebuild, if you like, and the start of this rebuild for Ruben Amorim. Napoli, we know, are interested. They made a bid. That was rejected. We think they've resumed talks with Manchester United over Garnacho. Chelsea as well, interestingly, are just lurking in the background. They've got an interest in Garnacho as well. So do I think he's going to get sold? I don't know. But when you hear what Ruben Amorim said in the news conference, and I know all of the headlines, I'm sure we'll come to that, was all on Rashford and what he said about Rashford. You know, what kind of got, overshadowed was what he said about Garnacho. Started him again and was asked the question, well, will he stay now? Anything can happen. And when a manager says that, even though he's been starting a player for 4 of the last 5 games, you kind of feel that something could be in the offing for him.
Because it's not hard to say, I want to keep him, he's staying, is it, if that was the case? And, obviously we're reading into it a little bit there. Do we expect Napoli to come back in with a new offer then? Do we, how does this unfold, as far as you make it? Because we've got a
whether
week
they
left.
come... well, I think they'll resume talks if they haven't already.
Okay.
I think communication is open between the 2 clubs. Garnacho himself, we don't think he wants to leave, but because the noise now is that if a big enough offer was to come along, then United would look at it. If you're in Garnacho's shoes, what are you thinking? It's like, well, they're willing, it seems, to allow me to go. So maybe I do have to look at other options with regard to where I can get, where I can play my football. Because if it isn't going to be at United, he's got to think about what the next best step is for him. And if the deal comes in January, you know what? It could actually happen. As much as fans won't want to do it, and as much as probably Manchester United don't want to do it, but this, I guess, is the legacy, for want of a better word, of mismanagement of the last 10 years. at United, and in combination with the rules for PSR. They know these rules have got teeth because clubs have been docked points because of breaching these rules, and United can't find themselves in that position.
It's horrible, really, isn't it? Like you said, these are the kind of difficult decisions that have to be made now because of this hundreds of millions of kind of transfer debt or unpaid transfers that we're in because of how.
I guess, Joe, just interrupting you there. I guess I think a lot of people will say that, you know, as much as they don't like PSR, surely there has to be a kind of a change, you would think, in those rules, because those rules surely were not brought about whereby, yes, to keep clubs' finances in check, but then if clubs are overspending, it can't be good that they can find a way of making pure profit by selling academy players, because that's, you know, the heart and soul of football clubs. Those are the kind of players that fans will always get behind and want to do well. And it's almost like, is the soul being ripped out of clubs if the only way to counteract these rules or to make sure they're not in breach of these rules and be docked points is to sell those players that are going to get a pure profit? Just doesn't sit right with many people, and I can see why.
Yeah, completely agree. And you end up with basically children being these kind of financial pawns in a game of chess rather than footballers that you want to bring in. Almost the incentive is, God, look, he's really good in the academy. He'll be great. We can get 20 million for him, rather than let's put him in the first team and win some titles with the likes of Scholes and Neville and Giggs like we did all those years ago. Just moving on from that a little bit then, how important do you think that Garnacho deal is to the rest of United's window? Because you said the PSR deal, the PSR lines are a little bit close. We need some money to come in before we can spend potentially. Are we almost banking on getting Garnacho sold before the likes of Dorgu or whoever it may be could come in?
I don't know whether we go as far as to say that, but it just feels key.
Yeah.
Because it's at the forefront of everything, and because it's clear the reasoning behind having to do a deal, if that's going to be the case, with Garnacho, because we know that United will get that pure profit for it. And if I could just give you a reminder of how it works, when you sell a player, and for example, if it is Garnacho for £55 million, that £55 million is pure profit for United, goes straight into the books as £55 million. Whereas using that £55 million to buy another player, if you spend £40 million, say, on a player, it's not a net profit of that in that financial year of £15 million. It's actually a net profit on those two deals, probably of around £45 million, because the only money that comes out of the account in that financial year is the first installment of any signing that you make. So that's why because it feels key for those reasons that United will be able to start doing a bit of business incoming, because all we seem to be talking about every week I've been on here, we kind of just talking about what players are leaving United, whereas Ruben Amorim, as much as he is auditioning the players almost, if they can fit into his formation, if they can play the way he wants them to, is like, right, if they can't, they're out. Well, he needs to bring players who can. So he's going to need to start that rebuild sooner rather than later.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's get to that then. Let's look at some players who might be coming in. Nkunku is one that's been linked. Obviously, a Chelsea player, plays in a similar position to Garnacho. Do you think that deal is dependent on the Garnacho deal? Is it something United are genuinely interested in? How would that look, do you think, with Nkunku?
I mean, clearly, if it was to be Chelsea that went for Garnacho, it would be easier to do a deal for Nkunku. But I mean, United aren't looking at a permanent deal as far as I'm aware at all. They are not looking to buy Nkunku. They would like to do a loan if they are to go into the market for him. I think they've just explored a few of the conditions of that deal and see if it would be possible. And like I said before, it would be easier if you're sending someone like Garnacho to Chelsea. You're talking to them, and while you're talking to them, you could say, well, we're interested in Nkunku, but we want to do a loan deal. But I think he's got interest as well from abroad. In Bayern Munich are interested in Nkunku as well. So yes, there is that interest in Nkunku, and I don't think if he was to go to Napoli, Garnacho, that it would rule out Nkunku, simply because I think United are after a loan, and that's what they would like to do. Ideally, if they could get an option with that as well, they could consider it. And the loan with the obligation is effectively a permanent signing anyway. And I think they would just want to see if it would work or not. You say he kind of plays in the same position as Garnacho. I would say he would probably fit in to Amorim's system more than Garnacho, because you could see him playing in one of those two number 10 positions. Maybe even up front on occasions as well as the single striker. So as opposed to Garnacho, when you look at it, wing back, he's not that. The number 10s, he's really not that either.
No. And I think Nkunku, a lot of people put off his injury record has been awful for the last 2 or 3 seasons. But I think if it was a loan, there's a lot less potential for that to be an absolute disaster, isn't it? Worst case scenario, he misses a few games and he goes back to Chelsea. I think where I saw people worrying myself is you end up paying 30 million for him, and over the next 5 years he plays 50% of the games. We need a bit more than that. But I think Nkunku's when he's playing and he's fit, he's a very good player. But we'll have to wait and see. The big one is Dorgu, Patrick Dorgu, obviously. Yeah. Linked with United the whole window. It's been an ongoing thing. You tweeted last night. I'm just going to read your tweet back to you, just in case people who haven't heard it.
Right.
Yeah, you said positive talks between Manchester United and Lecce over Patrick Dorgu continued today. Growing belief that a deal can be struck. Fee under discussion in the region of £30 million. United prepared to walk away if the overall package is not right, but a willingness to get it done. Do we think this deal has taken a sort of step forward in the last few days then?
It feels that way. I mean, the Lecce president has said, we don't want to sell him. But I think United would probably say we don't want to sell Garnacho either. It's kind of a negotiating tactic with regard to trying to keep the market value and the price that Lecce would want. When I say United are prepared to walk away, I don't think that's an idle threat. I think because of the financial situation that the club find themselves in, they only want to do a deal that is going to be right for them. And it's got to be within their financial parameters. So they have been in long discussions over last week and this week with Lecce officials and Dorgu's representatives. We think personal terms aren't expected to be a problem. So now it's just going to come down to club. And we think that last week, an offer of around 30 million was rejected. And I'm saying now that the fee in the region is around 30 million still. There could be subtle changes to this because of the structure, how much United might pay up front. That can change the dynamics of a deal. So it's clear United want to bring in the player. It's clear that there has been progress, but it's also clear that if Lecce play hardball to the extent where United are thinking this is as far as we're going to go, then United are prepared to walk away from that deal. And he's not the only player that they're looking at. There's a familiar player that Manchester United are looking at as well if the Dorgu one doesn't happen, and that is Alvaro Fernandez Carreras, who you remember last year went on loan to Benfica, and Benfica inserted an option to buy of around 6 million euros, which they exercised because he played so well for them. And I think when he was performing really well and United were getting the injuries to like Shaw and Malacia, everyone was talking about Fernandez Carreras again. Why did they let him go? But what United have done with Carreras and a number of the other players that they've sold in the last couple of years, particularly the young players, is inserted a buyback clause into that deal. So there is a buyback clause of around 18 million euros for Alvaro Fernandez Carreras, which is around 15 million pounds, I think, at the current rate. So if the Dorgu one doesn't happen, I think United would consider activating that release clause. That buyback clause. I'm not saying that that's definitely going to happen, because if Dorgu is the first choice and they still believe that they can do him in the summer and not now, then it probably wouldn't be wise to exercise that trigger if Dorgu is definitely the first number one choice, which it seems to be. This could then have a knock-on effect to a current player at United, because if United do bring in a left back, a left wing back, then I think they will allow Tyrell Malacia to leave on loan until the end of the season, get regular first team football, which he isn't getting at United just now, get his fitness fully back, because it's 18 months is a long time to be out of high-level football and then reassess his future in the summer. I think the contract situation he's in works in United's favour. He's got 18 months left, but United hold an option for a further year. So I think it's a kind of a safe, it's a calculated gamble and a safe gamble, if you like, if they were to bring someone in to allow Malacia to go.
Wow, a lot to get into. I mean, it's a weird position, isn't it?
Because there's a lot of ifs.
Of course, but I think that's the nature with transfers, isn't it? Even up until the point they're signed, there's a lot of ifs around everything. I think the left back position, it's almost gone under the radar. The fact that we've basically had no left backs playing for us all season, and no one talks about like an injury crisis in that area, but we genuinely just don't have any. There's no left backs playing. Like Malacia, I know he's around, but he's not picked and doesn't seem to have quite come back from that injury fully yet. It's been full backs and centre backs and right backs playing there. It's a crazy situation.
It's the most problematic area United have got, and it's all well and good saying, oh, Darlow can play there. Oh, Mazraoui can maybe move there and play there as well because they're all versatile.
Yeah,
I think United at this stage now, they need to get players who can play there, whose position is there, and can play in the system that Amorim wants. Because if you look at Darlow, you've got to have a bit of sympathy for him in one way. He's a right-footed right back.
Yeah.
Not only is he being asked to play wing back, but he's actually being asked to play wing back on the wrong side.
Yeah.
So he's having to do 2 or 3 different things under a new manager, try and get used to a system, but playing on the wrong side. So the sooner United can sort out that position and get someone that round peg in the round hole, the better. And it feels like Dorgu's the one that they can see doing that.
Well, I hope they can get him, and I hope it is the right kind of fee. I feel like with United, there's always so much scrutiny around the fee and whether we were sort of the United tax was applied and whether we could negotiate our way to a good fee. I think around 30, as you've said there, it seems to be the kind of the current negotiating point. I think if it can stay around there, then I think a lot of people would be happy. It's when it's like, 40 million.
Yeah. I think that's what Ineos are trying to do, because I think they want to get rid of this United tax.
Yeah,
they don't want to United have overpaid. You'd say on a number of occasions. You could name a lot of players.
Yeah, we'd be here all day.
how much have they spent there? They don't want to do that anymore. Yeah, and someone like Dorgu, if you think it's going to be around £30 million, what is he, 20 years old? It's clear that they've seen something in him, and he's young enough to learn under Amorim.
Yeah, that would be massive, and obviously the Alvaro Fernandez Carreras as well. That feels like there's always going to be an air of desperation if you do that. Someone who you let go 12 months ago, and now you're paying 10 million more than you sold him for. Like, because we couldn't get Dorgu, I do think it would be a big statement from Ineos to get Dorgu in for a good fee, and then we push on with him and Amorim together. Looking at other players then, back to some outs then. Start of the window, it felt certain Marcus Rashford would leave Man United, whether it be on loan or permanent. We've got AC Milan looking, Dortmund were keen, rumours of Barcelona, I think even Napoli were sort of mentioned in the conversation. Not heard anything for 2 weeks almost on Marcus Rashford. What's going on there?
I mean, if you're doing an interview on December the 17th saying you want a new challenge, you effectively want to leave Man United. If you're doing that interview, the first thing that came into my head is, come January the 1st, there's a club he's going to. There's something in the background that's done already. As we record this, 28 days into the transfer window, he's still training at Man United. I cannot understand how this has been allowed to happen. So 28 days in, he's training with them. He's not getting picked. I mean, this thinly veiled criticism from Ruben Amorim. I mean, that went beyond anything anyone's ever heard from Amorim on Rashford on Sunday. That
was a little bit crazy, that actually, wasn't it? That was a bit wild, that.
It's extraordinary what he said. But the message he is trying to say is not only for Rashford, but he's almost using Rashford as that example, but for his whole squad. If you're not training properly and you're not living your life properly, which was pretty significant as well, he mentioned that, then you're not going to get picked in this squad. The issue that United have got with these comments is, surely if you are a club that is interested in getting Marcus Rashford, at the start of the window, United could probably say, we're not going to pay any of his wages. If you want him, you're going to have to pay the full £325,000 a week. The later in this window we've got, the more criticism that he has received through the manager. To me, that can only weaken Manchester United's negotiating position. If a club was to come in really late in the window and United have just decided, just get Rashford out, how much of those wages are they going to have to pay to ensure that Rashford does leave the club? It's an extraordinary situation to have found themselves in. But if the ideal scenario that by 11 p.m. on February the 3rd, they would want Marcus Rashford at a European club for the rest of the season on a straight loan, with that club paying a substantial portion of those wages. But all options still remain on the table because he's still there.
Yeah.
And if he's still there at this point, there's a chance he'll still be there at Man United come February the 3rd. Now, if that's the case, there's going to have to be some sort of reintegration. And Ruben Amorim is going to have to hammer home the point. The reason you're not getting picked is because of those two reasons I talked about in the press conference after the Fulham game. So you need to sort both of those out, and you will be back like every other player in line and in contention to be part of the first team squad, and therein in line to play in the team. If United have decided long term, Rashford is not going to be a United player long term, he has to be playing for the rest of this season somewhere, ideally in a European club or at United, because it's not, the market value is all they're going to be worried about now if they're actually going to sell him. And the market value right now, when he's not getting picked, is not great.
No.
And if he spends the next 6 months not playing and they try to sell him in the summer, what kind of price are they going to get for Marcus Rashford? That's the problem that they've got. It all started off earlier on in the window. AC Milan won him. They've now signed Kyle Walker. They can't actually physically sign Rashford because of the non-EU player rule. So AC Milan are out of the equation. Borussia Dortmund have been interested. They'd love to have him, but the finances are simply not going to work out for them. They needed United's help when they did Jadon Sancho this time last year. And he's on nowhere near the wages that Marcus Rashford is on. So they're obviously clearly going to need the help of Dortmund. Rashford himself wants to go to Barcelona. But if you're talking about clubs who have got financial problems, they are number one on the list. They have to create salary space to be able to even accommodate Rashford. So they would require players like maybe Ansu Fati or Garcia to leave the club to even be able to start negotiating a deal for Rashford, which means the later it goes, are United going to have to start relenting on how much they're going to have to contribute to these wages to ensure that Rashford gets another club? It is not a great situation. And Rashford was almost the one who put the onus on United, but it was not United. United could sit there and say, this has nothing to do with us, this is Rashford. But now that mood has kind of changed slightly because of the comments that are coming out of the club.
This is why people always say, oh, make them train with the reserves, kick them out. This is why people and managers don't do that, because you completely put yourself in a corner when it comes to negotiating, don't you? Like every country every club in Europe knows Marcus Rashford is in exile at Man United, and therefore we have the leverage in terms of negotiations. And that is a big problem for Man United, and it's a big problem for Marcus Rashford as well, because if he wants to get his career back on track and he wants to be back in the England squad and all this down the line, he can't be sat, in the stands for the next sort of 18 months while his contract runs out, or however long's left on his contract. He does need to go somewhere at some point. Yeah, it's a bit of a disaster, this really, isn't it, for United? I mean, the other thing as well is, you mentioned about Amorim mentioning his lifestyle and on and off the pitch kind of stuff. And he also mentioned the other day, Amorim, that United he wanted to kind of inject some pace into the attack, but he couldn't because of the Marcus Rashford situation. So it's clear that there's obviously a disconnect here between what Marcus wants and is willing to do and what Amorim wants. And I find that really bizarre that Rashford is kind of saying behind the scenes he wouldn't mind playing for United again, he's up for that, but he's not willing to do what Amorim wants him to do. And I don't understand that. Maybe he thinks he's being unfair, but it does feel like just a disaster of a situation for a player that, you go back a couple of years and everyone would say, this guy, we want him to be the sort of the face of Man United. We want him to be a legend at Man United, and now everything's just sort of crumbled, and it's pretty awful, really. Let's move on then. Let's talk about someone else. Casemiro. At the start of the window, there was links to Saudi. Again, is another one that Amrim's basically stopped relying on almost altogether in terms of on the pitch. It seems Toby Collier's sort of surpassed him in the hierarchy in midfield. Is there any movement there? Is there another player on huge wages? Could he leave?
It's the Saudi interest was just that. I don't think it actually formalized into anything concrete, and I don't think there's been actually any formal approaches or bids for Casemiro in this window. The latest we have now is that Sky Italy are reporting that Roma checked on the conditions of a potential loan deal for Casemiro until the end of the season if Paredes was to leave, because there's a lot of rumours that he might go to Boca Juniors, and then they would look at Casemiro. But then, it's like a contingent on one thing happening for Casemiro to be able to get a move to someone like Roma. As far as Casemiro is concerned, we understand he'd be open to a loan move to Roma. United, ideal scenario, would want to do a permanent deal and get some money for Casemiro, because clearly he's not going to be in the long-term plan. So try and get some money back for him. But they would entertain loan offers as well, is what we're being told. So again, in the last 6 days, time is running out again. Could a deal be, materialized maybe to an Italian team like Roma, or does the Saudi interest come back again in this month?
Yeah. Oh, it's one to keep an eye on for sure. But it's weird that there's all these players who, like, maybe half a dozen players or so, maybe not half a dozen, 3 or 4 players you can imagine leaving, and yet the incomings is pretty dry, isn't it? It's maybe a left back, maybe an Nkunku. You think, well, Casemiro goes, Garnacho goes, Rashford goes, Malacia goes. We need more than just one or two to bring in.
I just get the feeling that with United's recruitment now, they have to hit the bullseye on every signing.
Yeah.
Every single signing now. This is not like, if you compare that to Liverpool or an Arsenal or a Manchester City, clearly they want to get every signing right. But they've got a lot of leeway to maybe take more of a gamble than maybe Man United have. Because of what's happened to United in the past few years. If it is only to be the one player that comes in, say it is Dorgu, but it's the right player, and you see a few players leaving, it just feels like Amorim is trying to get to the end of the season, having auditioned the players in his squad and say, you can fit, but you can't. And then once he's got an idea of who stays, then he can start building on the players around him. It's going to be so difficult, though.
Yeah, it is. Like I said, they have to get it right. We've gone from a sort of 1 in 5 kind of success rate on our transfers, and it kind of has to be 4 out of 5 going forward, doesn't it? We have to
5.
Yeah, it's impossible.
Seriously, because of the finances, they can't get anything wrong anymore. It's simple as that.
Wow,
they're not going to make the money. They're not going to make the money back on some of the players they want to sell.
No.
If they end up selling Anthony, 86 mil, what are they going to get? Nowhere near
25, maybe.
Once upon a time, Marcus Rashford, we were talking about 80 to 100 million pounds when he was linked to PSG. What would they get for him? If you were to sell Marcus Rashford right now, what price would you get? I think United would be happy with around 40, 45 million.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Would you get that?
I mean, it's mad though when you think the number of wingers in world football that have put up 20 plus 30 goal seasons that Rashford has. I know they were a couple of years ago now, but there's not that many, and yet because of how poorly it's gone in the last 18 months, he's gone from one of the most exciting players in Europe to, like you said, getting 45 million for him. That's teams at the bottom of the Premier League spend that on players now. That's not a crazy fee at all. It's just it's a sad situation really. Like you said, forces Man United to be almost flawless in the transfer window for the next 3 or 4 windows. Well, that's the jobbiness I've got on the hands. There you go. Right, thank you, Dharmesh, for coming on. Thank you very much as well for joining us at home. You'll be back on transfer deadline day as well, won't you, next week on Monday? Yep. And we'll have another update then. Hopefully by then, we've got a few people through the door. We've had some outs. Man United, some of these dominoes start falling that mean United can actually get some of these deals done, which would be very good. But thank you very much for coming on.
No problem. Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, thank you for joining us at home. This has been a transfer special with Dharmesh Sheth from Sky Sports News. We'll see you in a bit.